All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. I'm very excited for this tech talk to speak with Kathleen with New York Public Library about the Books for All program. So I'm gonna hop right in here and do the intro and then hand it over to Kathleen. So Kathleen Riegelhaupt is with us today. She's the Director of eReading for the New York Public Library. And in this role, she's responsible for developing and evaluating New York Public Library's e-reading strategy and aligning the strategy within New York Public Library's broader institutional strategies and investments. Kathleen served previously on NYPL's digital policy team, where she provided decision-making and analytical support for digital policies, investments, and activities across branch and research library service. And prior to joining this team, Kathleen led teams responsible for securing and managing all private foundation, corporate, and government grants awarded to the New York Public Library, which means she earned her salary because she got some funding back, which is good. She holds a Master's of Public Administration from New York University's Wagner School of Public Service, a Master's in Art History from Northwestern University, and a Bachelor's in History and Art History from Boston College. So again, I'm really excited to have Kathleen present on this really important topic. So with that, Kathleen, you can take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen right now and start the presentation. So I hope you can all see that. Just give me a heads up if anything goes awry. Okay, so thank you, Jesse, for inviting me, and thank you to everyone in Maricopa County who is joining today. I'm really excited to share with you some of our recent work, and I'm looking forward to the conversation following the presentation. So what I've prepared today focuses mainly on our Books for All project, but I do want to share first some relevant background about the library, New York Public Library, my role, and SimplyE, which is the technology that's allowing us to implement Books for All. So I do want to leave plenty of time for discussion about the technology, our goals for the project, and the impact we've seen to date. So I will start, and Jesse did introduce me in my bio. I am a strategist and not a technologist by training. So if you have technical questions that I'm not able to answer today, I would be happy to follow up with Jesse and provide answers to some of those questions. I will do my best, but if there are areas where I do not feel qualified to answer, or I just really don't know the answer, I will be very honest about that and get back to you with answers to those questions. We have a really strong team of people who really can help with those kind of questions. Okay, so before I jump into the details of the project, I wanted to just introduce the New York Public Library, the digital team, and my role specifically. So forgive me if this is all really familiar to you all, but it's a big organization. We're complicated. Here's some context. So New York Public Library is unique among public libraries for many reasons. Many of these are governing features, and that shapes what we do, including our patron base, the development of our technology projects, our collections, our patrons. So New York Public Library was founded in 1895, and it's a unique public-private partnership. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are not a city agency. We do operate with significant city funding for operation of our branch libraries, our community libraries and neighborhoods, which are in 3 boroughs of New York City, the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. For those of you who would like the little history background, Brooklyn and Queens boroughs both have their own independent public libraries, and that is because all 3 systems were incorporated before New York City was incorporated as a 5-borough city. So there is your small New York City history lesson for the day. So we still exist as 3 independent systems. New York Public Library also has 3 world-class research libraries. Those are funded through a combination of private funds raised and some state and city support, although much less significant than what our community libraries receive. So the research libraries, their collections really compare to those of national libraries or academic libraries, but they are open and accessible to a broad public. So those include the Stephen A. Schwartzman building, which many of you know as the Fifth Avenue Library with the lions out front, the Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, and our Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. The library is governed by a board of trustees led by President Tony Marks, and chief library officers for both the branch libraries. Brian Bannon is our chief of the branch libraries, and the research libraries. Brent Reedy is now our interim, Andrew W. Mellon director for the research libraries. The digital team on which I sit is about 60 people, and that includes full-time and contracted staff. That's a big digital team for a public library. We are led by our Chief Digital Officer, Tony Age. So the team is made up of engineers, developers, product and project managers, user experience designers. We have an ILS team, and we have a policy team. So with our colleagues from across the different divisions of the library, responsible for the library website, our ILS, our apps, digital asset management, and relevant for this conversation, our e-reading strategy, business, and experience. So that is just a segue into kind of me and my role. As Jesse described in my bio, these are the key responsibilities that I've been given. I've been at New York Public for a while now, but this role is one that I took on in February, and I am the first director of e-reading. So this is a new role. So these are sort of formal ways of describing that we know that ebooks and e-reading represent a major transformation in our core service. And we know that it's important that our e-reading experience and business is one that's sustainable and one that's developed in the context of our overall goals as an institution. So really just saying we don't want our e-reading service to undermine our physical branches, collections, or strategies. And we know we need to understand and respond effectively to the universe of vendors and partners and other service providers, which we know can have a disruptive effect on our business. Okay, so thank you for sitting with me at that background, and this is sort of the main event. So books for all. So I wanted to just set the context here, and I know this is not new to anyone in this audience, but this is starting where we started with this project. We wanted to respond to just the staggering number and scope of book bans that we were hearing about from across the country. So I've put some numbers on this slide, but the headline is really for us that we know that book challenges and book bans are not new, but the movement we felt was really growing and reached a point where we just asked ourselves, what could we do in response? And I do actually just want to call out this last bullet. We know that the indirect goal of many of these actions is to create a culture of fear about building an inclusive catalog. And we can't quantify that impact, but I think one of our goals was really to counter narrative. We don't want, how do we create a counter narrative to book bans? How do we support librarians facing specific bans, but also feel supported in their efforts and by the larger community? So what we decided to do was create an advocacy effort in support of library values to make free and open access to information. We were able to use our existing e-reading app, which is SimplyE. We're able to make, for a limited time, a small selection of commonly banned books available to a national audience without limits or restrictions. So you can see the goals of the project here, but I think it's worth saying explicitly, we did not seek through this project to serve as a digital library of banned books. We are not seeking to replace the collections in libraries where they were banned. I don't think we felt like we could do that. And I think we had some concerns about, what would serving as the digital library for, the United States or areas with bans. We had some concerns about what that would be. So really focusing on the fact this is an advocacy effort on behalf of libraries, those ones facing bans in all libraries, to promote free and open access to a broad, diverse collection of books. So specifically for this effort, we were able to negotiate with publishers to provide free and unlimited access to 4 books that have historically or recently been banned or challenged. So we really thought it was worth having a representative selection of titles. We wanted to put the book bans in context and illustrate intellectual consistency of library stance against censorship over time. So we worked with 3 publishers, Macmillan, Hachette, and Scholastic. They donated these titles to serve for free to a national audience, starting in April of this year and continuing through the end of May. So there's no fines, no holds, no waiting for any of these books. They're just available without limitation. There weren't a certain number of books, really, if we had, as long as our system could hold the number of requests, we would be able to fulfill those. So onto the selection itself, we started with the list of books that we knew had historically and recently been banned, and we also had our librarians vet them. We wanted to be representative in terms of what kinds of books are being banned. We know that current books that are banned often focus on race, LGBTQ issues, history, religion. So we wanted to have somewhat of a representative sample of those books. And I will say, I should pause and just say, any publisher that we reached out to, I felt like was was enthusiastic about participating. There are a lot of challenges in kind of clearing the rights and securing the rights for this period. So these were the ones that kind of hit that vein of they were representative, they were available, we were able to clear the rights for the time period that we had. So you can see here the 4 books, Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi, that is from Hachette. Also from Hachette, Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, a book that's historically faced a lot of bans. Speak by Laurie Hall Sanderson, donated by Macmillan, and Kig and the Dragonflies by Case and Calendar, which is being offered by Scholastic. So the books are available for free via our e-reading app, SimplyE, which the New York Public Library developed in-house and we maintain. So if you will allow me to just take a small detour onto the background of SimplyE, if for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's available for free to download for either iOS or Android devices. So if your library participates, you can download the app and then add your library credentials and access your library's ebook collections. There's also a free collection of public domain materials that are available without having to select a home library. So this is where actually the banned book collection appears. More on that in just a moment. I do just want to say, many people I think wonder why a library that is not a software development company is building their own app. We buy and contract services all the time, so why was this different? I think in this case, we recognized that reading is central to our core mission, and e-reading was becoming an increasing proportion of our borrowing and reading. We also realized that because of those things, we wanted to make sure that we had control of the relationship with our patrons. We could communicate directly with our patrons. We could get data on, control data and privacy, but we could also understand what patrons were doing in our system. We wanted to be able to promote the books we wanted to promote, including, those that didn't have major holds on them. Promoting books that have holds means that we just drive up our spending. So if we had already bought a license, we wanted to promote those that didn't have major holds. We wanted to provide a better patron experience by unifying the ebooks that we bought, not having to just use vendor apps depending on which vendor we bought from. We wanted to make sure we were supporting our patrons with special needs, high needs, and we also recognized that by developing an app, we would have the ability to negotiate for better prices and terms. So that's just a little bit of background on the app. Those were the original goals of the project, and I think they still remain relevant. Okay, so back to Books for All. So to access this free unbanned books collection in SimplyE, you just follow the guidelines, the kind of steps that are outlined here. And this is also available. We have a website for the project, which Jesse, I believe you shared that link in the invitation. So we wanted to make it as straightforward as possible. Download the app, verify that you're at least 13 years old. Now, anyone under 13 would have access to the app, but only one title in the collection, and that's King and the Dragonflies. So any e-collection that we develop, we do verify by age and provide access to those titles that our children's librarians have designated as appropriate for under 13. So once you do that, you locate the Books for All collection in the app. It's under one of the libraries. It's a drop-down menu of libraries. And so the Books for All collection includes, it's an existing collection that has public domain or out of copyright books. But within that collection, there is a swim lane, we call them, sort of like the Netflix style. So there's the unbanned books, which is at the top now of that collection. So that's where those 4 titles sit. You can browse any of those, click on them and check them out. And like I said, read them immediately. There's no wait list or anything like that. So I will just describe, this collection did exist previously. In order to implement the Books for All collection, my team had to spend several weeks upgrading the app. and adapting it to accommodate this new use. So previously, because this was only titles that were public domain, we didn't have to have any digital rights management on the collection. They were all public domain. We weren't concerned about that. But when publishers were providing these titles, even though they were going to be available nationally and without restriction, it was only for a limited time. So the DRM was a concern. So the team was able to build that in. And so now we have the capacity to, if we ever wanted to in the future, provide another title for a limited time that was in copyright, we would be able to do so with the DRM in place. So that is the technical piece of it that did take a while, but our team was able to do it so that the publishers were comfortable providing these books in this way. So in addition to the technical work, a major part of the project, because it was an advocacy effort, was crafting and promoting the messaging around Books for All. So we have a really strong communications and marketing team. They worked on the campaign strategy that took advantage of our web presence, our social media channels. They sought out earned media and developed a sustained press campaign. And we had opinion pieces by Library President Tony Marks that we published. We also took advantage of our mailing list to share our message with existing supporters. So that's advocates, patrons, and donors. So the impact was significant in terms of media reach. So this is the statistics for our launch week, which I will say was also a terrible news cycle in New York. So we were actually thrilled that we were able to break through in the news cycle like this. Major uptake in New York and nationally. And I think especially our social media campaign, which really focused on advocacy. We created this pledge, and you can see here, in response to the unprecedented book bans, et cetera. So folks could take that and put that into their own social media and share the campaign, which was really successful. And I will say, our press, other than, your typical, what you would expect, social media trolling, which was pretty limited, it was really positive or neutral. We really didn't have major pushback about, concerns like, why is, liberal New York pushing its agenda on the nation. We really didn't get that at all. So we feel like it was the advocacy message that we had hoped to put out there. This is just a visual from our press team of the different, the reach of the press campaign. We know it was national. There was a lot in New York, but clearly it reached Arizona. We know it reached several of the states where there have been bans. So we were happy about that. And again, I just included a quote from the library's president, because this was really the message that we wanted to go out with and that we sustained throughout the campaign. Here are just some of the social media pieces. This is sort of the, influencers or others who continued to share the message across their social media. Again, these were easy things that that folks could use and put on their own pages and on their own channels. So we saw a lot of pickup in this in the early weeks, but it continues. So in terms of the impact overall, both press and the content, we saw a significant uptake in the first few weeks. This is just through April. In terms of use of the app and downloads of the books themselves, we have tracked new downloads of SimplyE app, 21,000 new SimplyE users, and of that, 75% of those users were from outside of New York City. In terms of use of specific titles, we've seen, as noted here, almost 7,000 downloads of the 4 books in the Unbanned Books collection. We also saw almost 17,000 checkouts from the overall Books for All collection. So these are public domain titles. They've been in this collection for several years. That was, it says below, 998% increase in checkouts of that. So the sort of residual impact of this promotional campaign really promoted the other titles in this collection, which really didn't have anything to do with that, the Unbanned Books collection at all. The media impressions, again, this is just for April, really saw that there is sustained interest in this project in the context of other book bans and other messaging and news stories across the country. We had visits to the website really increased. It was our highest visits to our website in all of 2022 came on the first 2 days of the project. So again, just a measure of attention. With some of that, our team noted 10% of that traffic came from Texas and Florida, just areas where we know there have been a higher number of book bans than the rest of the country, just in the context of, 30% of that is from New York, and that's our overall web traffic. And then our subscribers, those are the people who received email messages or other messages that promoted the campaign. So next steps, we are going to continue, as I said, the project through the end of May. That is the time when the permission that we have for the books ends. At that time, the books for all the unbanned books lane will disappear. And if you have that book on your device, it will disappear from your device as well. Although we're hoping folks will look for their own public library if they haven't finished their book, or find another way that they can come access that book. We're continuing to promote the product. We're doing, thought leadership pieces, press pieces. Some other publications have reached out to us recently. I'm doing a few talks in the next few weeks about the project. I think there is interest in how we can use technology to address some of these bans. And then New York Public will continue as part of our book recommendations and our curation efforts. We're going to continue to just address the issue. I think highlight books that have been banned or that are being discussed in this way across the country. So I think we recognize there was significant interest in this, and unfortunately there is a long list of books and subjects that are fit into this bucket, unfortunately. Okay, so I realize that is a lot of information. I am going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to turn it back to Jesse. So again, leaves a lot of time for conversation. I welcome your questions, comments, and so I will stop talking then. Thank you all.
Yes, that was great. Thank you for the information. And please, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. We have just one coming in here. How was the experience working with publishers on this project?
I would say very good. We have developed relationships with publishers when, over the years, trying to negotiate for different kinds of access and experimenting with access to books over the years. So, our president knows I think, especially the major houses that are based in New York, knows folks well enough to be able to pick up the phone and call. And like I said, there was a lot of enthusiasm for this project. I think publishers and libraries are on the same page. Sorry for that terrible pun, that was unintentional. But really wanting, to be able to put books out in the world and have individuals decide whether or not they read them. So I think we both knew that we were coming from the same place. The logistics of it, and really these were people, I think, working really hard to clear rights, depending on who held the rights for each book, making that happen, get the agreements signed, making sure the files were available. So it was a very good experience. And I think, being able to have 3 publishers who were able to deliver on these 4 books was great. We came with a handful of books and kind of worked from there. But like I said, there was enthusiasm for the project across the board.
Cool. And we have another question kind of along those lines. Did you have to pay the publishers anything, or was this all?
No, there was no
okay.
cost. The publishers all donated the titles for this. It was just shy of 2 months.
Right.
And we're reporting back to them on the circulation statistics. What they're doing internally in terms of paying their authors. I'm sure that's, we've left that to them, but they provided this all for no cost.
I was going to say they're probably interested in the media impressions.
Yes. Well, that's right. And I think, recognizing that they stood in support of both libraries and their authors and their titles, they're on the front lines of this as well. So I do think they were good partners in the project in that way.
Cool. And I have another question here from chat. Have you heard of any schools or other environments in which books have been banned blocking access to New York Public Library website and apps in an attempt to prevent circumvention of local bans? That's a good question.
I have not heard of that, and it's a great question. I have not heard of that in particular, which isn't to say it may not have happened. I saw a piece today about Epic being blocked in some schools or pulled from some schools. So I think that is happening with some other just general catalogs, but I have not heard about anything about NYPL or SimplyE in particular.
Cool. And then another good question here. Has circulation been even across the 4 titles, or is one title like outperforming the others?
It's not been even, but there has been interest in all 4 titles. I will say I was a little surprised. The title that has been most downloaded is Catcher in the Rye, which I would have thought is probably, it's probably the easiest of the 4 to get get a hold of, but that has been the most popular. But there has been interest, and there in all the titles. I wouldn't say one is really like well out in front of the others, but the Catcher in the Rye I would not have guessed that, but has been the most popular.
Yeah, that's interesting. Those teenagers love Catcher in the Rye.
I guess so.
All those phonies out there. So we have a question about the DRM specifically within the app. So how did that get sorted out? And I think you said it took some time, but was it a difficult process, or what was the process to get that added into that public domain section of the app?
So that was a challenge. And again, I would, if there are specific technical questions, I would go back and kind of, I would have our engineers maybe write something up about some of the details. It was a challenge. We were able to use the Access 360 DRM for this. And so that's in partnership with Baker and Taylor. So the SimplyE app, that when we use it for the New York Public Library collection, we use Adobe DRM. So it was actually using a different DRM system, but one that we have worked with before on different products. It was a challenge. I think working with a smaller collection of titles, at least we were able to do the QA on the project. We could just make sure all 4 titles were rendering,
Right.
But it was tricky. And I could probably, if you have specific questions, would be really happy to go back to our engineers and ask. But that was the challenge in terms of making sure that the DRM was working, in terms of keeping the titles, they were protected, that they were accessible, and that they would all render correctly. We had, I'm trying to remember which title, one of them, we had to tweak it a little bit because there were some icons that were kind of rendering a little strangely. So we had to go back and first identify where in the process the problem was, and then fix that. So thankfully our team, like I said, this is what they do. They work on this app. And so they are able to, we have a QA team, and they are able to identify these things, and then we go back and diagnose them and try to fix them. So we had enough lead time in the project where we were able to do the work and the QA before it launched, so that we didn't have the launch day and then folks kind of, calling or sending us messages about how there were challenges.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. And is it okay if I include your email in the follow-up email I send out, your email address? So if people do want to send some more specific questions,
yeah, please do.
we can do that. Awesome. Yeah, and keep adding questions in the chat if you have some. Let's see. Let's just add your name in the chat. If you logged in and you haven't put your name and library in the chat, please do so. So I have a couple questions as well. A little more broader, but kind of related to this, since you're a little more well-resourced than some of us here in Arizona. Are you guys able to do market research on specific e-reading habits? I know you mentioned not wanting to compete with physical collections and other kind of strategies for NYPL. What sort of data points are you using to try to align that type of strategy for e-reading?
Sure. So we are able to do some user research. We do have to decide where to, within the resources we have, where to put those. But I think we recognize that the user research is a significant component of anything that we develop. our product team understand that building a product involves understanding our users. So, thankfully we are, this software team within a public library that has access to our patrons and our librarians, and even those folks in our communities who are not necessarily physical library patrons. So we have done, I think most of this has been pre-pandemic, but we did interviews with people in branches. We work closely with our librarians. Our support team, who gets all of the questions about the technology, they will always tell us what they're hearing and kind of give us that immediate feedback. But I think we are, looking at different groups, whether it is how young people are using apps. We're looking at broad questions of who is and who is not using the library. We have done research, especially once we shut our physical doors in March of 2020, and we saw a real, a huge uptake in our use of e-collections. We did some research on who those people were, right? And not individuals, but what zip codes most of the users were from, what books they were borrowing. We know that our e-readers tend to be from neighborhoods with higher incomes than the users of our physical libraries. So that's a key point for us to understand. And so we've done some of that research, but we really want to do more. How are people reading? What are the genres they're reading? Who would borrow an ebook, who maybe wouldn't come into the physical library, so things like that. So we're doing it. There are, the bounds of the resources available, but that is really important for us so that we are not developing something and just putting it out in the world and hoping that it's what people want.
Yeah, and then we had a question come in about, in particular with market research. I know this is something I've thought about a lot too, and which is like the privacy concerns. It's this challenge, right? Because we live in a world where people have an expectation of how things function digitally, and that's all rooted around, data collection and data mining essentially. So how as a library do you provide that or balance that privacy concern with trying to provide a good digital experience? Because it's hard to do that without data.
Right. No, that's a great question, and it's something we wrestle with that balance, because privacy is not only important to us, it's important to our brand. And I don't mean that in a flip way. People trust that the library is not peeking into what you're reading and where are you in the book and where you've, maybe highlighted a section. And we're not doing that. We try to disaggregate the users. When I say we can look and see where our users are coming from in terms of zip code, but that is not connected to their account, those patrons' accounts and what they're reading. We have a data collection system where we are disaggregating that, and we do delete information if we do have any about users and their borrowing, in the same way we do with physical loans and kind of not including that data. So it's a challenge that makes it harder. We are not like I said, looking into an individual patron and their books. So it's kind of finding that balance. But that when I'm talking about the zip codes, again, that is downloads of the app itself. It is not connected to like the circulation manager and the specific books that people are checking out. It's more looking at trends. That's where we're hoping to do that analysis. When we do interview patrons, again, that is, our research there. We do, either get sign off from patrons or whatever data we collect, we keep that in-house.
Right, awesome. And then I have a question about SimplyE, because I know I've looked at it before, and it's awesome that I love the concept of a library kind of owning the app. Of course, most libraries don't have the resources to do that. But it's really cool that it's available for other libraries to use as well. What has been sort of the progress, or like, I guess, roadmap, if you will, for SimplyE? I know when I looked at it a while back, it worked fairly well, but not well enough that we wanted to abandon the sort of market platforms of Overdrive or Biblioteca or whatnot. So what has been the sort of growth for SimplyE and the plans going forward?
So I think initially we knew that some of the libraries who were interested in using the app were looking for specific links, being able to use Overdrive audiobooks, being able to integrate Hoopla. So some of those we've been able to do. Overdrive audiobooks are available now. From what I understand, I don't think Hoopla is yet. Those, the challenge, I think, for New York Public Library is we are not, understanding what our capacity was to be a service provider. So we have had some system integrators take on that role and are doing that work to help set libraries up so that they wouldn't need the kind of comprehensive technology staff and to connect APIs and do that work. So there are some integrators that are able to do that work if libraries are interested. Whether or not, I don't know all of the different challenges or the concerns that people had. I think this, we've added new features since it launched. Like I said, different content types integration are available now. But I don't know that it is, Overdrive has some features, Biblioteca has others. I think, there's probably not 100% on either of those.
Right.
Yeah, I think, we are driving, we are trying to bring more of our patrons onto SimplyE because we do think it is, it's so important for just our overall service. But we do understand that, if we take away certain features, some people really like that. Some people love the Libby interface, and that's what they really come for. So we know that, anytime you're, replacing one product with another or suggesting one or the other, you're not going to make everybody happy. So,
right. Do you have numbers? I mean, maybe not off the top of your head, but just rough estimate of what amount of digital circulation goes through SimplyE?
At New York Public, I know that we have at least 200,000 users on SimplyE, but I don't know the percent of our circulation that is through that. It grew when we closed our doors in 2020 because we had a very explicit campaign to bring people, we knew that we were having more e-readers come into the system, and we wanted to do that through SimplyE. And so that grew, but I don't have those numbers for you specifically.
Right. And I actually have like a couple broader questions that kind of come up in relationship to the SimplyE, and like you were talking about, you guys having staff to help onboard other libraries, which is fascinating, and kind of the role that you have as a library. I mean, you mentioned before the president has relationships to just call publishers. In most libraries, especially here, we don't really have that. We're constantly trying to advocate for things through the vendors, right? Like we're kind of always going through the vendors. So how does like New York Public Library see that role in terms of, because it aligns somewhat with this, where you're doing an advocacy campaign, which is kind of for libraries across the country to kind of really highlight this issue. And you mentioned your SimplyE, so there are components of what you're doing that are sort of to an extent support for other libraries nationwide, not a broad extent, but maybe a minor extent. So how do you see that sort of, or how does New York Public Library see their role? I mean, in terms of, advocacy to publishers or advocacy for banned books or technology R&D for e-reading apps, you know what I mean?
So I think we do recognize we have to balance anything we are doing with our mandate to serve, the residents of, the patrons in New York. I think, we were also one of the, I think it was one of the founding partners of Readers First. So we really do, I think, try to lend our voice and experience and expertise to any national efforts and advocacy. Most of the work, all of the work on SimplyE is open source. So, again, I know that not every library can take that. We've tried to make it as easy to kind of plug into it, without having to have that expertise. Again, I think that's when we went to work with the integrators to say,
right,
here is a product that libraries can take and for a service fee that most libraries would pay to other providers can link into this. So I think we tried to make it as open as possible while kind of understanding what our capacity was to be able to provide that service. When we're working with publishers, I think, for this project in particular, it was a national project. So we didn't, we kind of made it available to anyone across the country. It wasn't even specifically for libraries. But I think when we are negotiating for terms, in any respect, we would want those to be available for any library and not just exclusive for NYPL.
Right.
Again, happy to kind of always give, to give feedback on what we have learned in doing any of these projects. So I think you've touched on the balance piece of that.
Right.
It's, it's hard. We are a library for New York, and our funding coming from the city. Our collections, we buy our collections for use by New Yorkers. We recognize that we can't just open our collections up for a national audience, which I actually don't. I wouldn't say we should do that anyway, because I think folks should have the support in their local communities for libraries. But again, in terms of lessons learned in what we're developing, we're always happy to share that with as broad an audience as possible. Yeah,
that's interesting. So do you guys negotiate terms with publishers directly, or does it go through the vendors that then feed into the back end of SimplyE?
So we are working when I would say it's probably about a decade ago, where there were some real challenges with publishers pulling ebooks from libraries across the board. Some publishers pulled out there totally, and that is, we went, and that's when Tony really built the relationships with the publishers to be able to negotiate for access for libraries and not just NYPL. These days, there tend to be more established models. I don't know that we're not really going in and asking for specific terms that aren't available to others. Most of it being, the time-bound terms or the number of checkouts. We're not getting, I think, any specific terms that others wouldn't. We do have some, once a month we partner with WNYC, which is the local NPR station in New York, and we choose a title and there's a program around it, and we are able to provide, we negotiate special terms for that book where there's sort of unlimited licenses. But again, I don't know that it's so much different than what another library could get.
Right. Cool. That's a great conversation. So does anybody have any other questions in the chat? I haven't seen anything else pop up here. I think it's really interesting. Maybe just one more question for me while I wait and see if any other questions come in. So yeah, I saw your slide about kind of next steps. Is this idea, you sort of mentioned that there was some talks. Is this something as a strategist that you think should continue moving forward, or does it just sort of depend on the kind of climate around book banning in America?
So I don't think we have plans to, do maybe another series of books starting June 1st. We don't have that in the pipeline. But what I like knowing is that we can do this, that if we wanted, if there was a national read that we wanted to promote, we have the technology and the capacity to do that and provide access to a single title or a series of books. I think the advocacy piece of it, and then there's channels that we've created, and this campaign of books for all and unbanned books, I think we will probably sustain that. Our librarians, we often publish on our website reading lists under different categories. So I imagine those curation pieces, again, the books, our lists link directly to our catalog, but those lists and those, curated pieces are available to anyone who wants to put together those selection of books. So I imagine this subject will continue. Like I said, I think the number of books and the number of subjects that are being touched on this topic are unfortunately very deep, and we could spend a lot of time talking about this and promoting books that maybe are facing bans without running out of running out of content anytime
Right.
soon. So, that goes, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of overlap. We will do specialty collections for, Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and there's probably some overlap there in terms of what's being banned. Pride Month is coming up. We'll do a big list and related promotional materials for that. Again, there's probably a lot of overlap there. So
Right.
How we build in the banned books piece to all of those too, we'll see. But I think the book coming up in our book club is continuing on that theme of books that were banned. So it will continue, but not specifically in the way we had here. Again, it was logistically a challenge to get all these permissions. So, the return on that investment, whether or not it's the individual book or the message, I don't know that we don't have plans to do it right now, but whether or not we can in the future, we have the technology in place to do that.
Right. Cool. And I don't have any other questions in chat, but I did think of one more question.
Sure.
What are there any other fun, exciting things coming down the line that you'd be interested to share at the end of the meeting here?
I think we are, continuing to develop SimplyE, and we are, like you said, we're continuing to do some research and understand what is a sustainable ebook service. We really, I think, want to understand what our different audiences are. We have some of our designers who work with kids and really are trying to create a product that, a version of it that is more accessible to kids. We are looking to improve our capacity to host graphic novels. Again, we know that is, that's an area, that's a genre that gets a lot of uptake among the younger audience. So we're looking at those kind of different features. But again, those are probably the ones that the ones we do a little later on are the ones that are more challenging in terms of rendering, in terms of how we can make those available and accessible. So those are some of the things we're working on.
Cool. Well, I don't see any other questions. I did see a nice thank you in here from Danielle. Thank you. Says it must have been very cool and inspiring to see all the coverage and support.
Yeah, I think, and that actually, I hope that it's not just support and, for the New York Public Library. I think it's nice to see that people recognize that their libraries are doing this every day, that you all are doing this every day. So we wanted, librarians who are going to work every day and feeling the stress and struggle of doing their core work felt that there was support and recognized that there's support, which often goes unsaid. So I hope you all, can look at this and recognize that there's a lot of support for libraries and the mission of libraries across the country. So, so thank you for saying that. But I really, it's doing what libraries do. That's what we really think. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Kathleen. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to share about this project. And I'll send the recording out to everybody as well, along with Kathleen's email. If you have more specific questions or want technical questions answered, she can route you to the right location. So again, thank you everybody for stopping in today. Have a great rest of your Thursday. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.